over the years, the prequels have had a definite change in their reputation, from people saying they're just outright terrible to now some people's favorite Star Wars movie is Revenge of the Sith. And of course, part of that is that the kids who grew up with these movies have grown up, and now their opinions are the ones that are being heard. And heck, I am one of those kids. I grew up with these. The Phantom Menace was my introduction to Star Wars, but after seeing these movies 25 or 30 times or however many it's been, you start to think a little more critically about them. You see them differently than you do as a kid, and I do know these movies have problems. I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm sure you wouldn't either, but at the same time, I was looking back at these, and the more I thought about it, the more I was realizing that, hey, every problem that people tend to talk about with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith does kind of start with the failures of the Phantom Menace. And I'm not talking about the problems like for what you have to do to tell a prequel story where you have certain characters who are forced in that otherwise don't really make sense being there. So I'm not complaining about like R2 and 3PO being there, even though it's just so weird that Darth Vader created C3PO. And I'm not even talking about Boba Fett's origin story. Obviously, when I was a kid, it didn't really mean much to me, but, at the same time, I also wasn't buying all of his toys in the 80s. And I'm not really going to be trashing the things that were specifically done for the kids either. Obviously it's different for me because I saw them first as a little kid, but, at the same time, for as much as the story is really the closest we have to, like, a Greek mythology epic, kind of, the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker. At the same time, these are also kids' stories, so I'm not really going to be sitting here trashing the Gungans and Jar Jar Binks, no matter how much he annoyed me too. This is about me talking about the prequel trilogy as a whole, the overarching story, because The Phantom Menace is a fun movie, and of course some very important things happen in it. It's obviously Anakin Skywalker's introduction, and, this is how Palpatine is elected Chancellor in the first place. And even though those are important events, and we do get some fun moments, especially with Qui-Gon, it's not really important for telling the story of the fall of Anakin Skywalker. And then you add on the prophecy, as Anakin is apparently the chosen one now, and the story of the originals changes because it's not just a father trying to protect his son. No, it's that he was prophesized to always bring balance to the Force. But is it really that important to the Skywalker saga as a whole? I don't really think so, and when you consider the cost of it and time for this three-part story you're telling, if one of the three parts isn't that important, that's gonna have just a downward effect on the rest of your trilogy because all of a sudden we've wasted too much time. And we do see that with Revenge of the Sith because the biggest problem that movie has is with its pacing.
What?
The pacing in the movie is so fast, to the point where sometimes it feels like we're kind of just rushing to the end. And the biggest example of this is obviously when Anakin goes from telling Windu, oh, we can't kill Palpatine, it's not the Jedi way, it's not right, to, oh, I guess right and wrong doesn't matter. Okay, I'm gonna go kill these kids so that I can save Padme. And those two things happen within 10 minutes of each other. And yes, there's obviously a lot more at play with Anakin here, and if you watch the TV shows or read the books, there's a lot more going on in his head, but that's still a problem for the movies. We shouldn't have to do all this extra work for Anakin's decision to make sense. It should be able to stand on its own as a story, but because we spent so much time with Qui-Gon Jinn and little kid Anakin, we can't really explore all of the problems that Anakin Skywalker is having that leads to him falling to the dark side and becoming Darth Vader. And there is also a lot that was cut from the final story, because we don't get to see the creation of the rebellion. That was something that was originally in there. There are deleted scenes for it. So it really costs us a lot for Padme's character as she goes from this senator who cares deeply about the galaxy and wants to preserve democracy no matter the cost to someone who's mostly just standing around crying, being shocked by things that we've been seeing from the beginning.
And not just the men, but the women and the children too.
Okay, maybe we're just better at reading things than Padme is. But the bigger problem is there are still parts of this story in the final cut of the movie, and without the context of it, it just feels random. Like how Anakin all of a sudden just doesn't trust Padme anymore, or how he thinks that she and Obi-Wan are having an affair, which, yeah, that storyline was there, and there were parts of it that were left in the story. It's just so random because we hardly even see Obi-Wan and Padme interact at all, and all of a sudden we're supposed to believe they're having an affair. But even the lack of trust isn't ever explained, and it's not something that Palpatine is able to plant those seeds of because we don't see that, yeah, Padme was keeping things from Anakin. She was keeping the origins of the rebellion from him, so she was actually keeping a secret from him, and he did have a reason to mistrust her, one that Palpatine could play on. We just don't get to see it. Before I make my next point, though, I want to stop and just for a second, let's think about the original trilogy. Obviously, it's built around Han, Luke, and Leia, and their relationship is very important. It's based off of need also, as Han is a hired gun who needs the credits from Luke and Old Ben, and then they all save Leia on the Death Star as they eventually all come together, save the day, and change as characters because of their relationships to each other. And as the trilogy goes on, of course, they spend time apart, but they always find their way back to each other because the relationship is so important to all of them, and it's really the center of the trilogy. Let's compare this to the prequels. Now, obviously, we know what the story is going to be, but let's try to imagine that it's not as we know it for a second. Obviously, we're telling the story of how Anakin Skywalker fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader. So, if we're picking three characters to build this trilogy around, of course, he's one of them, no question there. And it makes sense that the two people who would be the most important to him would be Luke and Leia's mother, and then Old Ben, who describes to us in A New Hope that Darth Vader was a pupil of his before he turned evil, and that Anakin Skywalker was a good friend. And here's where the Phantom Menace makes a mistake before we even dive into the story of it, because we don't see Anakin for the first 30 minutes of the movie, which isn't the end of the world. Obviously we don't meet Luke right away in A New Hope either, but when we do meet Anakin, he's more of a plot device than a protagonist, because obviously the Jedi and the Naboo are trying to get off of Tatooine, and, he's there as the only one who can save the day so that they can get off the planet and get back to Coruscant. It's just in doing so, he shows just how important he could potentially be. It almost kind of makes him a MacGuffin. So if he's not our main protagonist, then it really should be Padme or Obi-Wan. But the thing about Padme's character is because of the twist ending for it where she's, the queen of Naboo, but also pretending to be one of her handmaidens, we don't really get to spend the, full amount of time with Padme on that first go-round, because, we don't know just how important she is. And then we have Obi-Wan, who is just there. I mean, his problem is that he really doesn't have much agency in the story, so Obi-Wan's role in the Phantom Menace is more so just to show how much of a maverick that Qui-Gon is. And that's the biggest problem right there. The Phantom Menace really is Qui-Gon's movie. He's the main protagonist. He's the one who is constantly moving the plot forward. It's his decision that they flee to Tatooine after they escape the blockade on Naboo. It's his decision to bet everything on Anakin, and it's his decision that Anakin be trained as a Jedi. And it's not just that, it's also the amount of screen time that he gets. According to Gold Derby, he gets about 40 minutes of screen time in The Phantom Menace, and that's about 10 more minutes than Anakin does, who has the second most amount of time and whose trilogy this is supposed to be.
It's unfair.
He also gets about 2 minutes less screen time than Palpatine does in the entire trilogy, and that's our main antagonist right there. And even then, if we're saying, oh, he's supposed to be the wisest Jedi at this time, which, yeah, in a lot of ways he really is, but it's also supposed to be Yoda. That's what the cost of it is there. Instead of getting to see more of a wise Yoda be able to train the Jedi, we get that time with Qui-Gon. Oh, and by the way, we also spend about 15 minutes more with Qui-Gon in The Phantom Menace than we do with Yoda in the whole trilogy. And as for our big three who we are building this trilogy around, instead of spending time building their relationships, we get their relationships with Qui-Gon. We see him and Padme butting heads before they come together to save Naboo. We see that he believes in Anakin, believing that he's the chosen one even, that he will one day bring balance to the Force. And we get his student-teacher relationship with Obi-Wan as you can feel the history in it and just how much they care for each other. And yes, we do still get shots of what Anakin and Padme's relationship will become, but come on, we all know it's weird. He's 9, she's 14, and then you throw in the fact that Obi-Wan, I think, is 21, and it's all just gonna feel weird no matter how you're doing it, because all of the choices on the ages were made because George Lucas wanted to have this one shot in Revenge of the Sith. Yeah, that kid in the front there is supposed to represent a young Anakin, as they wanted a kid who kind of looked a little bit like Jake Lloyd did when he was playing the character, but it's supposed to symbolize Anakin killing his younger self, though the problem with that is we know in the story that Vader really does kill Anakin when he force chokes Padme and then overestimates his own power against Obi-Wan, so having that little bit of symbolism there doesn't really make sense for the story, and again, we have the problem for it with the Phantom Menace because the choices on their ages were made with that shot in mind, but that shot doesn't really make a lot of sense, and then it's weird to see Anakin and Padme start their relationship when he's 9. So you have to ask, is that one shot really worth this much for the trilogy? Because I understand the instinct for, hey, let's see what Darth Vader was like as an innocent child, just to kind of show that symbolically does make sense, and I understand the appeal for it. But it costs us a lot of relationship building for a shot that mostly goes over audiences' heads. And when I talk about the loss of relationship building, there's almost none of it in The Phantom Menace for these three. Obviously, Anakin and Padme have their stuff, but Anakin and Obi-Wan have their introduction, and that's it. And Obi-Wan doesn't even say anything in that scene, but even then, the couple of sentences that Anakin says to Obi-Wan is still more words than Obi-Wan and Padme share in The Phantom Menace, It's crazy. And in fact, when you think about it, the whole time that they're on Tatooine, Padme is in her disguise as a handmaiden. So from their escape on Naboo until they get back to Coruscant, Obi-Wan may think that he's talking to Queen Padme Amidala, but he's really just talking to a decoy. And because of how little time they spend together, by the time we get to Attack the Clones and they have to take center stage now, well, we're 2 hours behind, so we have to just be told about how much they care about each other rather than having seen it.
An old friend, like Master Kenobi.
You're the closest thing I have to a father.
He will not let me down. He never has.
And we can still make the story about how Palpatine comes to power. That doesn't have to be an either-or situation. It can be him deceiving the Senate into wanting to start the Clone Wars because his planet is being attacked, and he can be seen as more of a sympathetic character who just wants to keep the galaxy together, as he puts himself as a symbol for just wanting that peace, but needing to have it by fighting for war, as he deceives the entire Senate. But the difference here would be that we would have Anakin and Obi-Wan be meeting Padme for the first time as this is happening, as they come together because they need each other, only for it to kind of be slightly combative at first, but even that helps them grow as people because of their relationships with each other, and then they come together and save the day, even though they have inadvertently put the galaxy on a much darker path. This allows us to see Obi-Wan and Padme actually be friends. It shows us more of Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship, because the more we see of them being friends, being as close as brothers, the better the story is going to be. We get a little bit of it in Revenge of the Sith, but if we spend more time with them together, the more it's going to hurt when they're fighting each other at the end on Mustafar. And, we can even see Obi-Wan actually failing as a master, being too much of a friend, of an older brother, rather than the wise old sage that he will one day become. And maybe we can see him actually hold Anakin back, not because he doesn't believe in him, but because he's trying to protect him, or maybe because he has his own attachment issues and just can't let him go because he cares too much about him. And this also helps Anakin and Padme's relationship, because we get to see more of their friendship too, not just their relationship as lovers. And we get to see how much they care about the galaxy, how important they think their roles are in defending it, but they can't resist going further in their relationship, even though they know they shouldn't. And we get to see their relationship be built, but we also get to see the cracks in it start to form that Palpatine will eventually use to his own advantage, as Padme will eventually keep the rebellion from Anakin because she has trust in others who she doesn't want to break that trust in. It's not because she doesn't trust Anakin, it's because she cares about the other people who would be forming this rebellion. We don't even have to make them mature. Heck, let's keep it fun. Keep the memes of it involved.
I don't like sand.
It's only because I'm so in love.
But instead, we get the Phantom Menace, where we spend most of our time with Qui-Gon Jinn. And he's a cool character, don't get me wrong, but he's not the one who this trilogy is built around. We have 6 hours and 58 minutes, but there is a lot of story here, and we really can't be using all of this time to just set up things that don't always have the most direct payoffs. It's time spent away from Anakin, Padme, and Obi-Wan, and that 2 hours and 16 minutes that we spent on the Phantom Menace really does put us behind, so that we have to rush through to the end. And yes, the end of Revenge of the Sith is awesome, but it could have been so much better if the right groundwork was put in front of it, and the Clone Wars does show that that was possible. It did make Revenge of the Sith better, but it would have been really cool if it was just the movies that were able to set all that up and then knock it out of the park. But now I want to shift the question to you guys. Do you think The Phantom Menace works better as a Star Wars story rather than as part of the Skywalker saga? Personally, in terms of importance, I think it would be somewhere around like Rogue One, but that's all I got for you guys today. So if you enjoyed, please drop a like, subscribe if you want more like this, and I'll see you next time on STV.